Good evening, everybody. My name is Liz Zimmerman, and I'm the community organizer for the National Council of Jewish Women New York's Jews for Repro New York campaign. I'm so glad to be here with you all this evening. The National Council of Jewish Women New York turns progressive ideals into action by working for equity, social justice, and empowerment for historically excluded and underserved individuals and families in New York City and state. We're a grassroots organization of volunteers, advocates, and community leaders who are inspired by Jewish values, and we provide direct services to support our neighbors in need, people from all racial and religious backgrounds. Also, for many decades, NCJW has been the leading Jewish organization fighting to protect and expand reproductive rights and abortion access. The Jews for Repro New York campaign aims to change the narrative around religion, faith, and abortion, and show that the issue of faith and reproductive rights is not one-sided. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight and to show this powerful film. First, I'd like to thank Park Avenue Synagogue for hosting this event, and specifically thank you to Rabbi Zausmer and our other panelists, Dr. Christine Ryan of Columbia Law School's Law, Rights, and Religion Project, and filmmaker Paula Eiselt, who made the extremely powerful film we're about to watch. I'd also like to thank Mara Bernstein and Julie Schwartz for your work in putting this event together. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Before introducing the film, I wanted to quickly note that this past weekend was NCJW's 5th Repro Shabbat, which is an annual celebration that honors the Jewish value of reproductive freedom. It takes place each year on Parshat Mishpatim, the Torah portion that contains the verses commonly referenced as the foundation of Judaism's approach to reproductive health, rights, and justice. I listened to your speech, Rabbi Zausmer, and really enjoyed it. Under God is a short film about the national Jewish response to the US Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and almost half a century of women's bodily autonomy. Filmmaker Paula Eiselt was inspired to make Under God after witnessing the lawsuits filed in Florida challenging that state's abortion ban on the basis of religious freedom. The film shows the lived experiences of impacted Jewish women and the various lawsuits launched by rabbis, Jewish organizations, and interfaith leaders challenging abortion restrictions and bans state by state. In an ironic twist, the very laws being used to support these challenges are the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, also known as RFRAs, which in prior cases were actually used to allow evangelical Christians to circumvent civil rights protections, as in the notorious Hobby Lobby case and the same-sex wedding cases at the US Supreme Court. Under God shows us how Jews and Jewish groups are now flipping the script, used so effectively by Christian nationalists to assert their own rights to religious freedom. In taking on these public protests and cases, Jewish leaders around the country are asking the United States to protect women and democracy by preserving the constitutionally enshrined separation of church and state.
I'm Courtney Tofsky.
I'm Holly Rednick-Kurtzberg.
And we are two of the Tikkun Olam committee co-chairs at Park Avenue Synagogue. It is our honor to introduce the panelists for tonight's discussion. As you know, Paula Eiselt is a Primetime Emmy-nominated Peabody Award and DuPont Columbia Award-winning two-time Sundance Film Festival director and jury prize winner, known for her journalistic rigor in telling timely and intelligent cinematic stories led by strong-willed characters. Her films can be found on platforms such as Hulu, Disney+, HBO Max, PBS's POV, and Arte, and have screened at over 100 film festivals worldwide, including Sundance, South by Southwest, and Hot Docs. Her award-winning documentary features include 93 Queen and Aftershock, and most recently, of course, Under God. In 2022, IndieWire named Paula one of 22 rising filmmakers to watch, and she is a 2022 Doc NYC 40 Under 40 honoree. Paula is a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts with a double major in film production and cinema studies. She is a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Bravo, Paula.
Dr. Christine A. Ryan is a human rights lawyer and a scholar who directs LRRP's groundbreaking work at the intersection of religious liberty and reproductive rights. Christine is leading expert on legal and movement strategies for abortion rights in the U.S. and abroad. Christine joined Columbia from the Global Justice Center, a women's rights nonprofit in New York, where she served as legal director. Among other projects at GJC, Christine co-led a campaign for a new UN treaty on crimes against humanity, produced large-scale reporting on the human rights impacts of U.S. abortion restrictions, and pursued accountability for international crimes. Before that, she served as senior legal advisor and director of programs to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, where she completed human rights investigations in 8 different countries. Christine has also worked on human rights in Iran, LGBT rights, and human rights approaches to international development. Christine began her legal career as a human rights advisor to the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. A scholar of gender, human, and constitutional rights, Christine completed her doctorate in law at Duke University School of Law as a Fulbright Scholar. She holds an LLM from University College London and a Bachelor of Laws of Irish from University College Cork. She is a member of the Religions for Peace Standing Commission and an associate expert at the Religion and Equality Project at the University of Essex. Rabbi Shana Zausner, our own rabbi, is associated with Park Avenue Synagogue, beginning her career as a rabbinic intern and then as an assistant rabbi. From her ordination in 2019 until the summer of 2022, when she returned to PAS, she was an assistant rabbi at Temple Aliyah in Southern California. And if you haven't heard her sermon from this past Repro Shabbat, you should tune in to PAS Connect and listen. It's really worth it. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and Rabbi, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you both so much for being with us tonight. Let's have a round of applause for Paula and her amazing film, and Dr. Christine Ryan spending both of your evenings with us. And thank you to all of you for being here watching the film. We're going to take some time to discuss a little bit up here, and then we'll open it up and hopefully have some time for some questions. So if you have things that are popping into your head, make sure you keep them, think of them, and we'll get to that hopefully pretty soon. But I want to start, Paula, I want to start with you because we were discussing actually a little bit before this event started. We got here early. We're talking about how incredible this film is, and you have made films before, but what inspired you to say, this is the film that I need to make right now?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming. It's amazing to be here. So this film, I wasn't planning on making it because I obviously did not think that the Dobbs decision would have occurred. But when it did, a colleague of mine called me up and said, what are we doing? And I, was in the throes of just like shock, like all of us were. And I was like, I don't know yet. I was releasing another film, which is related. It's about maternal health. So it's, exactly related, but I wasn't planning on diving into something new at that point. But she said, if I, get the funding in place, will you do it? And I said, okay. And really, we just started a group of women from the industry and supported by, great philanthropists, and then film organizations really just came together and said, we need to do this. And the story that was popping up at the same time was Rabbi Barry Silver, who unfortunately is not with us anymore. He passed away about a year ago. He had, he had filed a lawsuit against the state of Florida even before the Dobbs decision in reaction to their 15-week abortion ban. And but it was all over the news that there was this rabbi who was suing the state on the basis of religious freedom. So I thought that was like really, really interesting, because usually you don't think about abortion rights as a religious freedom issue. So that was like the inciting incident, the story that we dove into, and then that led to, of course, meeting Ellie and Marcy and Rachel Laser and all the folks in the film. But that was really what got me into it. And the last thing I'll say is that because I had just come off of making this film on maternal mortality, I knew that the connection was going to be profound, that when you limit abortion and you ban abortion, the maternal mortality rate unfortunately goes up. So that made it more dire to me as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a calling of the moment. You rose to meet the moment. Yeah. So for me, and I'm guessing for many of you as well, the question that is most on my mind finishing watching this film is what's going on now? Like, what is the status now? So, Christine, I'm going to turn it to you for a moment. Can you share with us the current status of the cases that were discussed in the film? We got little updates at the end, but kind of current updates. Have any of them been resolved? And I guess, are you also aware of any similar cases that are going on now?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks so much for having me as well. It's an honor to speak next to Paula, which I've had the opportunity to do so before. And similarly, must thank Liz Zimmerman for introducing me to this event and bringing me on board. So yes, there's a lot of updates on the different legal cases that are depicted in the film. So the quick answer in the two Florida cases is that they were both voluntarily dismissed. So they didn't go very far. And really the reason for that was in part, and you heard some of it with Rabbi Barry when he was discussing the language in the statute about involvement in abortion. And really the sense was that the plaintiffs they had in terms of clergy members, and I do think it was a very powerful idea to do the case in that way. And also at that time, you needed clergy to step up, but that they wouldn't necessarily have standing because they wouldn't be able to show harm, that they were targets of this ban. However, in Indiana, very clearly, as you saw with Ellie, who was one of the plaintiffs, women throughout the state are suffering harm, unable to get abortion care, and a whole other range of reproductive health care. And so that case, the plaintiffs involved were a number of women. Hoosier Jews for Choice had associational standing, and they were successful last April in the injunction that you saw at the end of the case that was upheld by the Indiana Court of Appeals. And it was a really, really great decision. It was a 3-judge panel, unanimous, 2 Republican appointees. And they were really clear in that decision that if, that the way that the precedent has developed in terms of these religious freedom laws, that if practices such as decisions around contraception, like we've seen in Hobby Lobby, if that could be considered a religious practice, of course the decision not to give birth could be considered a religious practice. And it's really an easy legal argument to make in describing abortion as a religious practice. These suits, and in general in religious freedom law, what is considered religious is quite broad in American constitutional law, for the right reason, in that we don't want judges basically legislating what's religious and what's not. So to round up on that, That case, in April, they held that yes, the injunction was valid. The state appealed immediately, but the Supreme Court of Indiana in December rejected their appeal, so now the case will go to trial. Beyond that, the story isn't as great at the state level, but there's hope that I'll get to. So the Missouri case, that also, they weren't successful. However, in Missouri, a state ballot measure passed. And those plaintiffs were very much involved in the campaign for the ballot measure to enshrine abortion rights in the Missouri Constitution. So in that sense, we can think about litigation as a way to propel other actions on the ground, whether it be legislative or messaging. There was another case in Wyoming that was also led by two fantastic Jewish lawyers representing 3 Jewish women who challenged the state abortion ban for its ban on abortion, but also the chilling effect on IVF. And the court was very quick to dismiss their case, but the way they off-ramped it was this, and this is a problem in a number of these abortion suits, is they said that because the women weren't pregnant right now, they didn't have standing, which is, if you think about the track I just laid out in the Indiana case, it takes a long, long time for these cases to go through courts. So the idea that you have to wait until you're pregnant and then turn to the court for your religious exemption is just a non-starter. In Wyoming, there was a challenge to the state abortion ban on a number of grounds, including free exercise, but also on establishment grounds and a whole other range of constitutional arguments. And that case was also successful, but on the basis of the right to health, which, just as an aside, is interesting because they have a right to health amendment because in terms of the weaponizing, Wyoming had one in response to the Affordable Care Act. And now that has been used to recognize an individual's right to make reproductive decisions. There's a case in Utah that's also making right to conscience claims, and the Utah Constitution uses that language, right to conscience, so it's not a RFRA case. And another very recent case that I think is exciting and could have a lot of purchase is a case by a group of doctors in South Carolina in federal court. So these cases were all in state court. This is a case in federal court. And again, the fact that it's doctors who are, raising this religious freedom claim to get the exemption from the abortion ban could provide, if they're successful, that provides an opening for access beyond just the individual who's motivated by their faith to get an abortion, because it no longer matters about the individual woman's faith, but the provider itself. So again, it'll take a long time, but that case it's very, very, very important, but it was filed in January and an awful lot of other things clouded out the news in January. But so do take note of it, and hopefully I'm working with the litigators to try and get more messaging out about that case. Thank you.
It's so fascinating to me. I'm far from a legal expert. That's why we have you here. But it's so fascinating to me that the way that Jews and other religions are approaching these cases often comes from a perspective using laws that Christians once used, and now we're trying to use them ourselves, like RFRA. So let's take a moment. Actually, I know for those who are watching the film closely, you may already know, but will you just define for us what is a RFRA, how many states have them, and just how they've been used so that we can all be on the same page about what a RFRA is?
Yes, lawyers are terrible at using acronyms and not explaining them. But the film does, I think, do a really good job at, explaining a complex area of law. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act, basically what it provides is an exemption from an existing law for an individual and eventually for corporations if they can show that their religious beliefs are being substantially burdened by a government practice, and the government can't show that their infringement on the individual's religious freedom is pursuing a compelling interest in such a way that is the least restrictive means. So in a way that's proportionate. And 28 states have these mini RFRAs, they're called. So they're an analogue to a federal RFRA that's been on the books since 1993. And beyond just the state RFRAs, there are also, every state constitution has a free exercise of religion provision, and 9 of them have been interpreted to provide the same protection as RFRA. So it's a higher burden for the government to show that they have a compelling interest and that they're acting in the least restrictive way compared to the general free exercise clause in the Constitution. So the federal one, 1993, it had bipartisan support. It wasn't envisaged at the time that it would be weaponized in the way that it was by the right. But as you've mentioned, it is interesting, and there are other progressive causes because people are motivated by their faith to act in ways that aren't just contrary to human rights. You'll hear probably a lot more about this in the immigration context. My organization has worked with those who've been prosecuted in the last Trump administration under statutes such as harboring, or for doing things like making water drops in the desert, and being able to successfully defend themselves using a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So there's precedent for using it in a progressive way too.
Great. So, Paula, I'm curious to hear from you as you were making this film and we focused in on Ellie and her story. Did you come across other people, other women, other individuals, other groups, clergy people, whether they were Jewish or not, Christian or otherwise, bringing cases under RFRA or perhaps not under RFRA, but did you examine other cases and then decide sort of Ellie was the one you were going to focus in on?
So that's a really good question. I think in terms of like the interfaith aspect of it, a lot of what I did find was what was presented in the film, like through the different lawsuits that were filed in Florida and Missouri that brought, different people of faith together to bring a lawsuit. One interesting case, though, which is famous, I'm sure you know it, and maybe people here know it, is the Temple of Satan. Actually, like they were kind of like the first ones to really do this, and they brought a case saying it's against their religious freedom as Satanists that to not be able to ritualize abortion in a way, and they did it very, very seriously. Like it's a serious lawsuit. It didn't go through, but that was a really profound example of using this in outside of a Jewish context.
Wow, amazing. Very cool. I was curious also, the film starts out with where we sort of enter Ellie's home and we see the mezuzah that she doesn't place on the outside of her doorpost the way we typically do, but inside she says she's afraid of anti-Semitism and in the area that she's already seen. I'm curious about your including that in the film because maybe on its surface we might think that has nothing to do with abortion. I'm wondering if you feel like maybe there is a connection between anti-Semitism and the movement to restrict abortion, this sort of imposing one's religious beliefs on others.
Absolutely. So I think it was twofold. Like it was her personal, like starting with her personal story that here she is as a proud Jewish woman and who needs abortion care. And for her, just thinking about the place where she lives and her lived experience, that was like a double whammy for her. Like that, she's needs abortion care and she's Jewish in a place that there aren't so many Jews visibly. So personally, I thought that was important to her story. But the greater message and story is that really these abortion bans are an infringement on religious freedom, and it's because there's a lack of separation between church and state. And I think her hiding her identity in that way really shows that when there isn't separation between church and state, and we don't have religious freedom, we're not free to practice our religions. Like that's the key to freedom, is that it's free for everyone. So it was really important for me to include that, and that brings us to, like, in the film, I don't know if anyone noticed it, but it starts personal and then it kind of goes out to the states and then federally to, like, really this is abortion is a part of this greater white nationalism and Christian nationalism that is happening. So on that level too, obviously, a lot of these abortion bans are rooted in Christian theology, and by default, that's going to exclude Jewish people and Muslim people and people and other Christians, most of other Christians and other people of faith. So I think it was really relevant to show that.
Yeah, right. There's that intersection between someone else's faith being imposed on us and our not being able to practice our own rituals and feeling fear about whether it's putting a mezuzah on the door or any other Jewish rituals. Yeah, I liked that detail. So I want to shift a little bit and start to think local. We've talked a lot about these cases in other states that feel, I think, as a New Yorker, feel sort of far from us. I don't just mean geographically, but in a mindset, feel a little bit far. And here in New York, we're really not talking about abortion bans on a state level. So I want to turn to you, Christine, for a moment. And there was a Prop 1 ballot measure here in November in New York. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about that for those who don't know, and maybe share how that will kind of protect abortion rights here in New York, and what would happen if theoretically there were a national abortion ban. How would that impact that? How would that impact Prop 1 here in New York?
Absolutely. So first, congratulations on passing Prop 1 to New Yorkers. And again, I'm going to give a shout out to NCJW New York, who campaigned and were at the forefront of the campaign for a whole year before November. And it was really, really important because there was a lot of misinformation about the ballot measure. And so while New York, has anti-discrimination law, this was inserting into the Constitution basically an amendment to prohibit discrimination on a whole range of grounds. So the Constitution had prohibited discrimination on the basis of race and religion, and this added, in the context of our conversation, sex, but also pregnancy status and reproductive autonomy, making very clear that reproductive freedom and discrimination on that basis was prohibited under the New York Constitution. So while New York is certainly a very protective state for abortion rights, this amendment is important. I think a lot of people are realizing, that your local politics can change at any time. But also what's interesting about Prop 1 is that those who pushed for it and campaigned for it also see it as basically a launching pad for a whole other range of measures. So even thinking beyond the courts, in the legislature, what can you demand of your state legislator to provide for reproductive freedom? So it's a really useful hook. We'll see how much how important it becomes in the courts as well, in terms of challenging everything from the ability of religious hospitals in New York to prevent their own doctors from providing abortion care even in emergency settings, to pushing for more money to train doctors. There's a whole range of states and medical schools around the country where people get no training at all in how to provide abortions, move to New York, and have never had that training. So getting more money to do that, getting more money for contraception, and also for Medicaid reimbursement for abortion pills. So it's a good news story, but to answer the second part of your question is, what's the relationship with federal law? So right now there isn't a national abortion ban. So the way that, in some ways, that these state ballot measures, again, while they are really important and they really are a success story, if Congress and the Senate were to pass a national abortion ban and it was signed by the president, that would preempt New York law. I don't think that will happen. And I think it's really important, whether you're in New York or elsewhere, to keep making your resistance known, because the reason it won't happen is because politicians are afraid that they will lose on this issue. But beyond that, even without legislation, there are ways that federal law could impact what happens here in New York. And there are a couple of ways that this could happen. One, which is very clearly laid out as a strategy in, you've probably heard of Project 2025 and the America First Institute. What they're proposing is to revive a 19th century obscenity law that's on the books still, that's called the Comstock Act, that prohibits the mailing of obscene materials, and they want to interpret that as including abortion. And it did pre-Roe, included abortion and contraception, but hasn't in over 80 years. So what could happen is, if the Department of Justice uses that interpretation to go and prosecute, say, Danco laboratories who produce mifepristone, or a telehealth provider, or Planned Parenthood. That is something that Republican attorney generals are discussing right now. They're looking for the most sympathetic case for them and their cause. They probably won't want to go after a corporation, but they may go after Planned Parenthood, as they have done before. That could be challenged, of course, constitutionally. There are at least 2 justices on the Supreme Court. It won't surprise you to hear that they're Alito and Thomas, who have signalled that they're happy to uphold Comstock in that way. But we have to hope that this really is an extreme measure, but it is possible. There could be a national ban on mifepristone in terms of. It could be as easy as revoking the FDA approval. Again, it'll be very unpopular, so I don't see it happening at an agency level, but I could be totally wrong about that. There's so much that has happened in the past 6 weeks that I was wrong about. But it could also happen through the courts. The courts, the Supreme Court, they rejected the last challenge to mifepristone's approval, which is targeting a decades-old approval by the FDA, but they rejected it on standing grounds because the case basically wasn't ripe yet. We'll say from the perspective of of those who were making the challenge. But they're back again, and they will keep trying, as we know that the right does, to find the right plaintiffs to challenge the government's approval of mifepristone. So there are other ways that both the Supreme Court can continue to limit abortion care at a national level, be that emergency abortion care. So under the Biden administration, the EMTALA Act was interpreted, and there was guidance put out to make clear that in emergency situations, abortion was emergency care that had to be provided if you were getting public money, if your hospital was getting public money. And it's very likely that case could arise again, and that the Supreme Court, it's entirely possible that they will restrict the emergency care in that way. So it isn't a rosy time.
Yeah. You said we have to make our resistance heard. So for people who are here in New York, not a state where a ban is potentially being enacted, and not necessarily people who could be the plaintiff themselves who could necessarily bring a case, what should we as New Yorkers be doing to make our resistance heard? Like you said, to make sure abortion stays legal here. I read an article that you wrote about how you believe that these arguments being made on the basis of religious freedom, that religious exceptions to abortion bans, you say it's not a comprehensive legal solution, but it's a step in the right direction. So what should we be doing? If we can't bring a case necessarily, we live here in New York, what's the call to action for the people in this room? And then, Paula, I'll ask you the same question afterwards, but we'll hear from Christine.
Thanks. So I'll pick up on two things you said there. So, one is, very concretely in terms of activism at the state level. There are, there are many groups that you could support who are pushing for the state legislature here to adopt measures that I mentioned in terms of increasing the Medicaid funding for abortion, increasing the money available for training, and, as we've seen how important the SHIELD laws that exist, that they were passed by local initiatives and organizations, including NCJW, who really rose to the occasion post-Dobbs. And every year in April, NCJW hosts a lobby day. This year it's April 29th, and Liz Zimmerman is the person to get information from on that. But we'll really advance a range of measures that are so important in this state. And I have to say that it's the ability of individuals within their state to connect with their legislators. That's more important than what I do on a day-to-day basis in terms of legal strategy. If you having your voice heard by your legislator to improve access in New York is really, really important. What you also got to there in terms of, these cases themselves, they're not in terms of gaining exemptions for a number of individual women, that's not a solution to Dobbs. It's really important for those individuals for a whole range of reasons. Both they're accessing the reproductive health care, they're exercising their right to religious freedom, they're challenging the Christian supremacy that exists in this country. But also, whether it's the plaintiffs themselves or those who take the case, they're really, and Paula, you mentioned this too, elevating the message that faith is not inherently anti-abortion. And the reason that a lot of these cases are important and powerful, in addition to the care that they could hopefully legalize for some individuals, is that message. And that message is important to meet people, many people across the country who are in the middle, and meet them where they are. I've seen this in many other countries. There's a fear that talking about faith, anybody who talks about their faith or who considers themselves a person of faith is inherently anti-abortion. That's just not true. It's not even true for Christians. You can all obviously hear my accent. I'm from a country that still considers itself 92% Catholic. 68% voted yes to legalize abortion in the country. And similarly in Latin America, heavily, where you could even say are even more religious, on a day-to-day basis. And people can see that their faith in almost all religions includes principles beyond just text that include prioritizing an individual's conscience or helping others, and that could include priorities and support that they offer their own children or future children. And that exists in so many different faiths. And what I'll also say is when you talk to people who describe their abortion as being motivated by their faith, it often isn't a particular text that they refer to, whether it's in Jewish law or in some part of Islamic law. It's really those principles that they believe strongly in, and they interpret as requiring them to take this action to care for others, to care for their own family, to prioritize their health and well-being at that time. And that resonates with so many people.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Paula, I'm going to turn it to you for essentially the same question. What do you hope that people will take away from watching your film? And if we are inspired to do something and take action, what should we do?
Yeah, so do everything that Christine said, for sure. And CJW, I just feel like is a one-stop shop for like every type of activism around this and reproductive justice and more. On a non-legal person, filmmaker level, I think what people really need to do is talk about abortion more and share your stories and share your family stories with their permission and destigmatize this topic in our spaces, especially in synagogues. It's so incredible that you're hosting this and making it a regular conversation to have, because many people don't want to talk about it. And of course, nobody has to talk about things they don't want to, but it's almost like, shamed in a way. So we need to talk about it to destigmatize, but also, like you said before, raising awareness has real impact and effect on legal cases. So, Rabbi Barry Silver, Zichron Lebracha, like he filed that lawsuit. I don't know if he really thought he was going to win, but he brought it to the national forefront and made everyone start thinking about, oh, wait, like we can file something about religious freedom and abortion. He brought it to the stage, and that's really, really important. And the same thing with all the ballot measures. As Christine, you mentioned, like in Missouri, that case didn't necessarily go through, but like the activism around it, Americans United for a Separate Church and State, like they were on the ground there going from different houses of worship, like one by one, synagogues, churches, mosques, everything, and like really like activating the community. So when the ballot measure came, people voted. So I think the more we talk about it as a community, when and if we have to vote on something, whether it's in New York like we did or elsewhere, people will know what this is. I also think it's important to connect abortion with full spectrum reproductive health. I think a lot of the times people think there's maternal health and here's abortion, and they're on two separate ends of the spectrum. And we know that abortion care is part of health care. It's part of maternal health care. If someone has a miscarriage, for a very wanted pregnancy, as we saw in Texas, like women are dying. They're literally dying from miscarriages that require the same care that abortions do. And I think a lot of people don't even know that the same exact medication is given. It's the same medical procedures and processes, and those hospitals and those doctors, wouldn't act because they were, scared that they will be prosecuted. So we have to really talk about this in one conversation, so people think about it like that. And I think especially in communities that, that have children, these things come up a lot more than you think they do. I think over 50% of abortions are performed on mothers who have children already and are married. We have to talk about this, that it affects every community. Any woman, pregnant person, is affected by these laws, whether you want a pregnancy or you don't want a pregnancy. It's the same care. So I would, say just have more events like this. Keep talking about it. Like, ask your mom, your sister, your friend. Make it something that we can share and not be ashamed about.
Yeah, I love that. Empowering people to share their own stories and the stories with permission of others, so that we can destigmatize. Thank you. So I think I'm going to open it up a little bit. We have a little bit of time, so I think Julie will walk around with the microphone. If you have a question, I'll just invite you to raise your hand, and then we can go. All right, yeah, Julie, if you'll bring the microphone over here.
I have a question sort of adjacent to the topic. You mentioned with the Comstock Act. So if that were to happen, I assume that would impact the pharmacy benefits managers as well that are sending like birth control through the mail. I mean, obviously I know there's a separate issue of trying to wind back the control so specialty pharmacy doesn't have to go through the mail. But if that happens, I mean, wouldn't that just open up like a can of worms that would be really expensive?
So contraception is exempted. So that just to narrow the field there. But in terms of telehealth in relation to abortion pills, whether it's for, as Paula just said, whether it's for miscarriage care or because somebody wants to end a pregnancy for a different reason, they could entirely be prosecuted. Now, what I was saying, that we're kind of watching to see who they go after, because it is, in any of these cases, and when you're advancing a very new legal theory, they might not go after, for example, a pharmacist or even a company, because that will, immediately put the backs up for many, the general public. But if they've done a whole load of work to demonize certain providers or to demonize Planned Parenthood already, it helps their case, and it also makes it easier for judges to uphold what is a wild legal theory.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. Hold on. Wait for the microphone because we have some folks joining us by live stream, so we want to make sure everyone can hear.
Where can we tell people to watch the film?
Thank you. So it's on POV, which is PBS, and you can watch it on that platform. It's also on PBS's YouTube channel. So, thank you.
We love that question. Okay, Courtney.
Thank you. Your film was very eye-opening and amazing. I have a storytelling question more so, and I think it speaks to how well you told the story of going from individual to wider, but I would love to know if Ellie ended up having a second child.
Not that I know of. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that actually raises a question, so a legal question I had, and then also a comment that I had. I'll segue from that to, I was wondering whether or not, for instance, a non-pregnant woman who is choosing not to become pregnant because she has this history of trisomy 18 would be sufficient to raise a case in one of the states where they say you have to be pregnant in order to, be a reasonable plaintiff.
So what you're, similar enough circumstances, like one of the plaintiffs in the Kentucky case, that she was in similar circumstances. And even in Kentucky, the court said that it was, too beyond the realm of possibilities that there was this chilling effect of the abortion law on access to IVF, even though in Kentucky they had the same protection for unborn life provision in the preamble to their constitution that they had in Alabama, and the court still dismissed her fear as ungrounded and therefore didn't have standing. It's an easy way for some courts to off-ramp these cases. That's why I've been, encouraging providers to get involved in these cases, and because again, it's impossible to wait for a pregnant person. In Indiana, they did accept that the change in behavior, some of the couples described how they had changed, their sexual practices because they didn't want to get pregnant for this reason, because they would be unable to have an abortion. And that was considered enough of a burden on their religious exercise. So the law on standing just isn't consistent across the country at state level. And it has been, as I said, an easy way for judges to get out of these cases. Because on RFRA, it's so clear that it's just the same as an exemption for providing contraception. If you can get an exemption to not have to provide contraception, then an exemption should be available for accessing something that serves a very similar purpose in terms of deciding and having autonomy over decisions related to reproduction.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Yeah.
I think you wanted to ask Paula something too.
Yeah, it actually wasn't a question. It was just in follow-up to the comment that you made about the really important comment that you made about the fact that there is this continuity between reproductive health and maternal mortality. There's also recent data that in the last, since 2023 data just came out, that not surprisingly, infant mortality is higher in states, particularly Texas, but states where there's much more restrictive abortion rights. So definitely part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I saw that.
Thanks for adding that. Okay. Yes.
When you were describing the cases, I was a little confused. Are there cases where doctors who provide abortions are bringing cases under RFRA or other similar laws, arguing that as Jewish doctors or with Jewish patients that they should be able to provide abortion care?
So there's one case, the one that was filed in January in South Carolina in federal court. It's a collection of abortion providers who come from multiple faiths who are arguing under the federal constitution, so not under RFRA, but that their free exercise of religion is burdened by the state measure that prevents them from providing abortion. It has to be on the basis of their religious belief, not on the patient. But if they were to get the exemption, their patients, regardless of faith, would be able to access, because they would have, at present the laws don't criminalize the patients in any state. That could change. There's attempts every other week to criminalize the individual patients, but at the moment they're exempt.
Thank you. Yeah, Darcy.
This was fantastic. Thank you. I'm just wondering on the production end of it. I'm thinking you shot this in 2022 or 2021. Where and how long from finishing it to editing did this come out? Like, how long ago did you release the film? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I love it. Because this was like the fastest film I've ever created, and it's I'll never do that again that fast. We started shooting in August 2022, so the Dobbs decision came down like July 24th, I think, 24th. And first day of shooting was August, and then we premiered at Sundance in January. So we shot, edited, and got it out like in a ridiculous amount of time. But that's not typical.
That's them meeting the calling of the moment. You just couldn't wait. If you'd taken 10 years to make this film, that's not, yeah. Hopefully we won't be talking about this in the exact same way in 10 years. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Joan.
Thank you. In stressing the idea that people should talk with one another and make it lively, and that we are here in a Jewish group, would it be, I just don't know how many people here know what the specifics of the Jewish laws are. And I personally think it would be worthwhile to tell them, but I bow to you.
Sure. So as you heard in the film, it would be hard to find any issue that 100% of Jews agree on all the time. We love to argue with ourselves, but the majority Jewish opinion is that life begins at birth, the moment that the fetus is born. The text that we just read this past week in the Torah portion, that's why NCJW has designated this past Shabbat as Repro Shabbat. We read this text about damages, how damages are calculated after a violent incident takes place. And the answer, you may have heard this kind of biblical phrase, a life for a life, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, right? Have you heard that? So the verse that comes right before it talks about what happens if two people fight physically, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and causes her to miscarry. What is the punishment? And the punishment is a fine. It's a monetary fee. So that verse, with the very next verse saying the punishment for taking a life is a life for a life. That means if you murder someone, you pay with your own life. But if you cause a pregnant woman to miscarry, meaning you've caused the death of a fetus, you pay with money. And that text has become really the foundation. There are other texts too, but that text is really the biblical foundation for us to say that a fetus is not considered a life. A fetus is not a full life. A fetus is considered a limb of the mother. No different than, a heart, a kidney, an arm, a leg, a limb of the mother, a part of the mother, deserving of protection. If you hurt somebody's limb, you pay a fee for that. And if you if you cause the death of a fetus, you pay a fee for that. So there are multiple other sources we could look at, and if you haven't seen my sermon from this past week and you want to look at a couple of other sources, I encourage you to watch it because I go into a few others. That's not to say that every single Jew and every single rabbi that you could talk to would have the same opinion, but that is the majority Jewish opinion. Okay, we have one back here, and then we'll come to Holly.
Thank you so much. Aside from supporting NCJW, are there any other organization or outfits that are doing any sort of advocacy or lobbying that we should be aware of to be able to support? It's a wide question, but I feel worthwhile.
Yeah, you want to take
in New York? Oh, well, in New York, and they're a close partner of many of us in the field. NYCLU, so that's the New York ACLU, always has and includes reproductive health within their legislative campaigns every year in Albany, and then considering at the federal level, it's very hard to do federal policy work right now. But there are dozens of organizations from the Centre for Reproductive Rights to the National Women's Law Centre, the ACLU again, there's a national NCJW, there's Catholics for Choice, in terms of other faith groups, one called Sacred, who both support groups at the national level and have been very involved as well in passing a lot of the abortion rights ballot measures, and trying to give more capacity at the state level while it's so difficult to do federal work. But also there still has to be resistance at the federal level, and the ability to have people on the ground ready to pressure and resist the many possible horrors that could emerge in the next 4 years.
Another one is the Red Tent Fund that was started by a Jewish woman recently that helps women who need abortion access get it.
Great question about how we can get involved. All right, these are going to be our last 2 questions here, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for tonight. It's really amazing conversation. Christine, how are these abortion laws, are they being applied, I'm not sure if they are, to women who aren't necessarily looking to end or terminate a pregnancy, but may have a medical condition like cancer that requires chemotherapy treatment that would then, in many cases, end in a termination of a pregnancy?
Well, you have really hit on, a real tragedy that is emerging right across the country, in that, so some states have exceptions on the books for circumstances, for example, where there is a fatal fetal anomaly or a health condition that is very, very serious. However, because this is in the criminal law and because we have seen zealous prosecutors go after and talk about going after providers, access is almost impossible to obtain, even where you have exemptions, even for sexual assault in many, many states. I saw a statistic the other day on Mississippi has a sexual assault exemption. You cannot find one case where a victim of rape has been able to get an abortion within the state, even though it's technically legal. In terms of situations of fatal fetal anomaly, it's really, really difficult to define what anomalies fall within that category. Again, making doctors very, very scared to act. And sometimes it's their hospitals too, and the hospital boards. And they might not even be religious hospitals. It could be that the general council, they might be individually pro-choice, but they're risk averse. We're seeing that kind of compliance, over-compliance in advance, in a worrying way, and it's because of the over-criminalization of reproductive health care here. I will say in other countries, exemptions are used to provide significant access. Again, the best abortion law is no abortion law, but it's really, really difficult in those scenarios. So one of the cases in Texas did involve a cancer patient who had to go else. They went to, I believe, North Carolina.
Thank you. All right, this is going to be our last question.
It's what you were talking about before, earlier, organizations involved in lobbying. Is SART involved? Or assisted reproductive technology people?
I'm not sure I know the organization you're referring to. Different types of ART. What I have seen emerge, I don't know that specific group, but what I have seen emerge is newer organizations who are taking this whole reproductive healthcare approach, and also the other organizations who, had been doing abortion work for many, many years, realizing that now there is a huge risk to IVF and beefing up their advocacy divisions on IVF, and even contraception.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for your great questions. Most of all, thank you, Christine, Paula, both of you for being here. Paula, for all your work in making this film. Christine, for the work you're doing legally. I think we feel very grateful that you've taken the time to be here this evening. And for all of us, I hope we can take these messages with us. Liz from NCJW, I believe, is still here. Okay. Well, you'll speak with her at some point. You can also ask me or Julie or Mara if you want her contact information. But we've been publicizing, if you look back at some of your emails, we've been publicizing that day in April. That's the Advocacy Day. So would love for Park Avenue to have a little contingency that joins NCJW with that. And taking Paula's advice to heart, that we really need to be talking about this, that this has to rise to the top of our minds, even when there are so many other issues at the top of our mind, that we have to share our stories to the extent that we feel comfortable sharing them, and normalize abortion, reproductive rights as a whole spectrum issue, not just nationally, not just here in New York, not just as a Jewish community, but also here as a Park Avenue Synagogue family as well. So thanks everyone for starting that conversation by being here tonight.